Hi. So today I am hoping to bring to you a little bit of information about students that you might be engaging with in school who have a complex learning history or trauma history that may present as having challenging behaviors that are difficult to work with in the more traditional sense of um, providing consequences, punishments, those kinds of things. This is a really tricky spot for schools to be in, especially with staff, especially with the fact that sometimes what we're seeing students doing doesn't necessarily match what our history is and how we were maybe taught to behave or not to behave. Things are changing. The world has become a little bit more complex, and the students that we're getting are coming to us with challenging behaviors that are difficult to figure out what to do. So hopefully some of this information will just provide you with a background to sort of understand where my consult model or consult recommendations come from, but also maybe give you an opportunity to really think about why we're doing this and why this is happening, and to be able to look through students from a different lens that might be more supportive for you and your ability to support them. Um, so the first one we're going to look at is just shifting our lens as the adults. Student behavior doesn't just pop out of nowhere. We know that behavior is shaped. It's shaped from the contexts that we're in, shaped by the context of our own internal thoughts and feelings and emotions. All of those things kind of play a part in what we do. And strategies are learned and shaped due to reinforcement or punishment histories. And when I say punishment, I don't mean the standard sort of punishment like getting in trouble with the principal or getting in trouble with mom and dad. Punishment, just like reinforcement, is very specific to the individual. And there are times, especially students with trauma, where what is punishing for them is very different than what might be punishing for another student. And sometimes what you think is punishing is actually something that they have encountered within their learning environment that doesn't have a lot of meaning or influence, that it really won't have the impact on their behavior that we're hoping. The other thing is to remember that we are an educational space. And so everything that we do, from the lessons that we teach to the way that we talk with students and the way that we talk to each other as adults, it's all about being educative. And at times we can have the intent of being educative, but maybe it doesn't have the impact that we want. So we're really sort of in this sort of like tricky space as adults in schools. So hopefully some of this background information will just help you understand where sort of this new ideas in terms of even restorative practices are coming from, but also like how do we work with kids with these complex behaviors that we just can't seem to get our heads around. So what might look like defiance, oppositionality, and those kinds of things, or even like ADHD symptomatology, it's probably the wrong word, is actually really adaptive, especially in homes that are chaotic, that have various states of regulation and dysregulation. Maybe parents don't have the parenting tools that are the best for the child and so forth. Sometimes students develop behaviors that work for them to get their needs met. And that can look like defiance or oppositionality within a school environment where we don't need to yell, scream, kick, hit to get our needs met. Some kids, that's what they've learned to do to get their needs met, or get their wants that start to feel like needs. So it's a challenge. Uh, Behavior doesn't fit the context of school. It doesn't fit the fact that you got to wait your turn. We're not going to do that right now. We're balancing 20 kids in a classroom's needs and not just that one child. So it's really important to try to figure that out. Or if we can't figure it out in the moment, to just remember sort of what we're working with in the moment. So again, the stance is when we see behavior, it's adaptive. It's not broken. It's an adaptive response to the learning history that the child has been sitting in. And so now our role as educators, regardless of what your position is in the building, you're all educators, and your role and our role together is to help support new learning, and for kids to become contextually sensitive to the learning environment of school in order to be successful. And that is really, really tricky. So the next piece, I'm just going to kind of go through some learning history called life history. And we talk about fast strategies and slow strategies when we're talking about life history. This has been around for a while. You don't always see it in behavior analytic work, nor do I think we see it in educational spaces a lot. But it does really help us understand what's happening and how these things develop in an adaptive way in these different kinds of environments. And it's about how people allocate time and energy between growth, survival, and relationships depending on their early environment. So, how do people navigate their environment to make sure that they have success to survive, really? So in these harsh and unpredictable environments, children often develop these fast strategies because they have to survive in moment to moment. They don't have time to sit back and think about a response. They have to have a response immediately. It's all about instant gratification, present moment, act quickly, take risks. Better to do that in that way and figure it out than to wait around. Waiting around starts to feel dangerous. And sometimes it can be dangerous. So it's easier to think fast. And sometimes when we have to default to those fast strategies, they are a little bit more, they don't generalize as easily. Running away from a problem isn't necessarily a good generalizable skill when you're in, say, a school environment or in the mall or in the movies. Like, to just run out isn't really going to be helpful. To just yell and scream isn't going to be helpful. However, in sometimes these harsh or unpredictable environments, you get your needs met really quick because people just want that behavior to stop in the moment. Other environments are a bit more structured and predictable. These are the environments where you provide time for a kid to be dysregulated, to be upset, because it's safe for you to do that, to learn about tolerance, to learn about being told no, to learn about waiting your turn, to learn about you can be upset and still be safe. These slower strategies often help students and help people learn to slow down, to regulate, to be mindful in the moment. If you're in a more unpredictable home environment, you don't have that kind of time. So you don't always develop those skills prior to being in the school environment, which actually is more reinforcing for these slow strategies that come from learning in those environments. So it can be very challenging for kids. Yes, there are predispositions. There are kids that are born with ADHD and so forth. And sometimes these can kind of get mixed up together. So that's why it's important to not look primarily or only at a diagnosis for students, but to really try to understand their behavior from an adaptive lens. If we get too fixated on diagnoses, we don't recognize the fact that kids can learn and grow out of this stuff. As much as they learn to develop these skills, we can also, especially when students are young, help support their learning so they learn other types of behaviors that might be more contextually sensitive to school. So if you have a kiddo that has more of these fast strategies, it can look like impulsivity and sensation seeking, emotional reactivity or difficulty with regulation, social conflicts, quick escalation in peer interactions. Again, not having time to sit back, to walk through conflict, to process what's happening. It just needs to be done quickly. It's about survival. It's about positionality in the rank in order to make sure that you are not taken advantage of. So a lot of these kinds of things can start to develop for young people if they've grown up or been supported in a more of a harsh environment that doesn't have time. And again, I also wanted to say that saying that it's a harsh environment or saying that it's a bit more unpredictable, it's not a judgment call about whether it's good or it's bad. It's about recognizing that these environments exist, but these different environments don't always instantly transform into kids coming to school and being able to navigate the rules of school easily, because it's just not what they're used to. And that's really hard for young people, especially little guys in elementary school who are also 6, 7, 8, 9 years old, who are trying to navigate the world as it is. So all these things kind of play a part. And I think this is where, as educators, it's really important for us to recognize the opportunity that we can provide for kids to have a successful future when we're patient and we start to recognize that you're not bad. It's that your behavior right now doesn't quite fit the context. And I want to help guide you to new repertoires, to new behaviors, so that you can be really successful here. You are not a bad kid. You are a great kid who needs to learn some new skills. So again, these are not deficits, they're contextual adaptations. I use that word context and contextual really specifically because it has to do not just with the environment that you're in, but context also involves your learning history. It also involves your internal regulation, your neurology, does your stomach hurt? Do you have issues with certain kinds of things? So it involves all of it. And context just is all of the things that could be impacting behavior at the moment. And it's important to kind of understand those pieces. It's not just about the environment. So I want to point that out. So what does this look like in schools? I think you probably know this. I'm sure you interact with kids who have some of these challenges all the time. I think aside from educators, I think paraprofessionals sort of interact with kids with these fast life histories all the time. And sometimes as a paraprofessional, it can feel really chaotic and hard to know like what to do in the moment. You want to do the best job possible. You're in the trenches. You want to make sure the teacher can teach, and you're trying to make sure that the kids can learn, and you want to make sure that your student does a great job, and you don't want them to get in trouble. So there's lots of variables and there's lots of context that you as the adults are navigating that also play a part in this. So it's this like these relational pieces that happen. Student behavior doesn't happen out of a vacuum. It has to do with all the elements and all the variables within the context. And our behavior as adults don't happen in a vacuum and have to do with our learning history, and they have to do with how our learning history intersects with the kids that we're in front of. And so all these things kind of come up and it can get really complicated. So in schools, this can be really, really challenging. So again, just going back, fast strategies can really feel like problem behaviors because they conflict with school norms. Doesn't mean that school norms are wrong. School norms are meant to help educate students to be able to be successful with lots of different kinds of people, so that in the future they can go out into the world and navigate lots of different kinds of people in different kinds of environments, and be this as successful as they want to be. But when you have these problem behaviors that don't seem to fit, and are above and beyond what seems to be quote unquote typical, that gets tricky. So here are just some quick bullets to really look for. Difficulty waiting for delayed rewards, grades, long-term projects, waiting your turn in line, waiting for your hand to get called on, waiting to hear everybody else get introduced at the circle before it's your turn, waiting for lunch, waiting for recess, waiting to use the bathroom. Like all of these things, some of these students are maybe not used to. They get this immediate thought that they need. They say something immediately and it's immediately answered. They yell immediately at home and that gets answered. They scream and it immediately gets dealt with. So being able to wait for the delay in reinforcement, the delay in getting the needs met, and being comfortable knowing that your needs are going to get met even if they're not immediate. That's really, really challenging. And that dysregulation, and if you haven't had a time to learn how to self-regulate or learn how to sit in discomfort, you're more likely to kind of like explode or engage in some other kinds of behavior, or engage in some behavior that looks like problem behavior, but it's really you trying to regulate all of the dysregulation inside. I'm going to roll around on the floor while I'm waiting because I don't know what else to do with this feeling that I have, because I don't sit in this in a safe space any other place except for here. Multi-step directions without the immediate reinforcement. So more independent, that's like more independence, multi-step directions, remembering how to go from point A to point B without taking deviations. Escalation more quickly when things do not go as you think, as the student thinks that they would go. Things feel unpredictable. Even with all the predictability, because it's slower and because you're navigating lots of different kids, while there are schedules, the schedule is to help navigate and support multiple kids doing the same thing at one time. There's still downtime, there's still waiting that's involved with that. So while it's predictable, for some kids, it doesn't feel predictable because it isn't immediate. So this is where it gets fast. They're used to having the thing doing the thing right now. And if doing the thing is now, but you have to wait for it now, it's a slow now, that can be hard. Trouble regulating emotions under stress. That's, again, just not having the history of being able to sit with discomfort. This is where you get a lot of kids that need OT consult and OT support and sensory breaks and movement breaks. It's that how to sit with the discomfort and the dysregulation, and knowing that being uncomfortable is not bad. It's part of the human experience that's okay to have. But if your learning history has told you that it's not okay to have those, that we need to get rid of those, or we need to stuff those, or emotional differences are to be managed as opposed to being held lightly and talked about and thought about and considered in relationship to what's happening in the environment, that can get really hard. So I'm giving you a lot of information, and digesting all of this at once might be really, really challenging. So I encourage you to kind of keep thinking about it and looking at it from this different lens, like really going back to that first piece of, knowing that we need to shift this lens, shifting our lens and trying to understand. So again, here are ways that schools can respond to be educative, to be relational and predictable. Routines, clear expectations, provide fast, specific feedback. This is where sometimes reinforcement during the waiting period can be really helpful, because you're providing the student with more immediate, specific feedback when they're doing the right thing during these long periods of waiting. I like how you're waiting. Oh my gosh, this is really hard to wait. I know I'm super antsy to go to lunch. I can't wait to get there and eat my pizza. Are you having a hard time waiting? Yeah, waiting can be super hard. So again, connecting with them relationally. We are challenged. Oh, yes, my stomach hurts too, and I want to really eat. It's so exciting, isn't it? It's so exciting. And letting them know it's normal. It's normal to be excited. And we're not withholding lunch by having to wait. It's just part of the natural process in school, is that sometimes we have to sit with discomfort. Oh my gosh, the excitement to go out to recess. What are we going to do outside at recess? How do you think that's going to feel being outside at recess? When you leave the building, like, what do you like to do? Because you're so excited and you've had to wait. Engaging in those conversations during those time, kind of that talking out loud about maybe what you might be feeling or what you might think that the student might be feeling, can be super helpful. Choice and control, making sure that you're giving them choice and kind of contained control or selective control. Would you like to do this right now? Not offering choices when there are no choices. If the direction is to do this and there's no choices, it might just have to be, there's no other choice. This is the direction right now. And that's okay. That is okay. If the student says something like, "Can you give me a minute?" we reinforce that. Yep, what's happening? Are you feeling a certain way that you need this extra minute? We're still going to have to do that, but I can give you a couple minutes if you're not ready. But this is what we're going to get going. Is there a way I need to restructure this so that this is more doable for you right now? These are 10 math problems. Why don't we do like 2 and see how we do? Why don't you do 1 by yourself, and then I'll come back and check on you when you're ready. Let me see if you get that one right. So offering lots of different options to control the situation. And again, picking your battles, I guess, is really important. Always asking yourself, what is the goal right now? If the goal is spelling, if the goal is math, and the student is doing that and doing something else, and it's kind of a low level behavior at the time, provide reinforcement for what they're doing right and try to ignore what the low level behavior is so you don't get into a verbal tit for tat battle. I see that happen quite a bit. I do think that that happens at home. I think I've been victim to that with my own child. So I know that it happens. But if you provide the attention for what the kiddo is doing correct and sort of ignore that sort of problem behavior that you'd like to kind of have less of, layer in the reinforcement for what they're doing right, the likelihood that that other behavior will dissipate gets more highly likely. And again, it's not about immediate change in behavior. It's about reinforcing behavior so that you see an increase or a future frequency of that behavior. That's another condition that we have to remember. It's not about stopping it in the moment. If we focus on stopping it in the moment, we oftentimes reinforce those adaptive behaviors from having a fast life history. And over time, it's not helpful. Prioritizing relational safety, building trust and co-regulate before expecting independence. Expecting co-regulation is really just talking about the fact that we all share common human conditions. Our bodies respond in very similar ways to things like hunger, fear, stress, sadness, happiness. Our words for it might be different. Whether we find it reinforcing or a problem might be different. Our resilience to navigate hard feelings might be different, but they're all part of the human condition. We want to be able to have hard feelings and still do the thing that we're struggling with. Again, as long as it's appropriate to their learning, as long as it's appropriate to their level of learning. Once people get used to being dysregulated, they're able to achieve more and more and more. I can really struggle with this activity, but getting through tough challenges feels so good. I want to be able to do that. And it's not always bad. Anxiety isn't always bad. Sadness isn't always bad. I think when we have hard emotions, it's because something is meaningful for us. I think sometimes when kids don't want to do work because it's too challenging, oftentimes I think they really do want to do a good job, but they have a learning history that they're not good at it, or they feel that they're not good at it, and it's easier to balk at it than it is to face challenge and discomfort and not doing a good job. But we want kids to have that resilience. We want kids to have a love for learning. So how do we build that in? It's hard, but it can be very, very exciting to kind of walk through these emotional learning opportunities with kids, especially younger kids when they start to learn and grow. And oh my gosh, yesterday you could only do 3 and today you're doing 5. It's amazing. That stuff can be very, very cool. And it really builds sort of greater well-being for the child and for the community itself, so that others around you as the adults see how to engage with a kiddo whose life kind of set them up to kind of fail a little bit in public school. I know it's a horrible way to say that, but it can be really, really helpful. And at the end of the day, that's what's really challenging, how to navigate everybody's needs. Again, going back to sort of the slide, gradually building tolerance for waiting. I think we talked quite a bit about that. Teaching quick repair strategies. Giving students a way to re-engage with the environment after they've had a really difficult time, and not in terms of being ashamed of what they did, but to be able to say, my intent was to get my words heard. I realized my impact wasn't good on the community. I'm sorry for the impact. I need to figure out how can I do a better job at telling people what I need. It's this relationship. And I think the more adults model that too, like, I'm really sorry I got on your case about this. I'm really excited to see how you do with math. And I get excited, and I just want you to focus on the math because I'm really excited about it. And I know the intent is that I kind of ticked you off, and I didn't mean to do that. Again, super hard to do in the moment. I think if you're a parent, we can have these challenges with our own children, and then in school we're expected to like be these perfect models of doing this thing. And again, we're not always perfect, but if we keep these things in mind and have an understanding about how young kids are and how their learning history might not have allowed them an opportunity to learn these strategies, it really positions us as educators to be a really powerful influence for children. Just going to close this up. And again, this is really a long video, so feel free to take a pause, come back to it. I just want to be able to share all of this information so that people have an opportunity to review it and be able to ask questions later. So practical applications for staff, including paraprofessionals, who are sometimes the most important people on our teams doing this really hard work day to day. Reframing our lens so that when we go into the environment, we understand that this is not about a kid who's woken up today and come into school and been like, I'm going to be a pain. But that the student has woken up and come into school and just things are not clicking, things are not working. Maybe they don't have the skill yet. Maybe they have the skill, but they haven't figured out how to use it across context real fluently and without a lot of missteps. So we're still needing to reinforce. So seeing behaviors as contextually sensitive and adaptive strategies. Teaching replacement behaviors with skills. This is super, super important. Being able to teach kids skills and recognizing that kids they're not characteristics. Non-compliance is not a characteristic. It's a signal to us to let us know that there's something that the student needs to be more successful. And it's our job as paraprofessionals, as teachers, as specialists, as behavior specialists, to figure out what is it that we need to teach and how are we going to teach it in the environment, and not just in the classroom, but how are we going to teach it in all of our specialist classes and out on the recess and on the bus and so forth. Staying consistent. Do what you say and say what you mean. Am I saying that right? So students who have trauma and unpredictable histories need adults to respond the same way every time. And that doesn't mean in a rigid sense, like I'm going to say these same exact words every single time and I can only say these words, but to respond in a predictable manner. So that if I say I'm going to do something, I do it. And if I get in trouble, I know, regardless of the adult, they're not going to yell at me, degrade me, punish me in an over penalizing way that brings about shame and sort of has an impact on my well-being. Punishers in the sense of applied behavior analysis has to do with changing behavior, not necessarily traditional school consequences. And again, if we're going to think about traditional school consequences, they do not show in research that they have an educational impact, really. So the more we can think about consequences in terms of teaching and reinforcing the right behaviors or helping scaffold new behaviors, the better off we're going to be. Start small, focusing on 1 to 2 skills or routines at a time. Pick the biggest bang for your buck. What's the pivotal skill that's going to open up opportunities for this child? Sometimes what you'll find is that if you focus on that big skill, the child starts to develop quite quickly on their own. It's sort of like you've opened this door to a world of possibilities because they've been able to do X, Y, and Z things. And a lot of times that has to do with our capacity to engage with students in a more trusting and relational way, allows for greater improvement because we're trusting, because they can screw up and mess up, and they can be, and we can recognize as screw ups and mess ups as an opportunity for learning. I know the best things that I ever did to learn is when I mess up and I get feedback and I can go, okay, I got to go back to go forward because something didn't land right. My intent was this, my impact was not great. I need to go back to the drawing board. And then monitoring, celebrate. Data should be about celebrations. Data should be about celebrating success. If we're looking to take data because we want to track all the things that the child is doing wrong, now the child is wrong in our eyes, and we're always looking for that. Tell yourself you're going to find all of the white Lexus SUVs, and as soon as you put the white Lexus SUV in your head, you probably will start to notice those over and over and over and over and over again. And you're like, wow, there must just be more white SUVs. That's not really the case. You've just given your brain a signal to pay attention. And your brain just goes, oh, that must be important now. So if we start to look at students only for their bad behaviors, now that's what our brain is going to look for. And we're going to forget, or we're going to not really see all of the good that's happening. Whereas if we flip the script, we're more likely to notice all of those good things. And that's way more fun to watch kids and hang out with kids, to notice all the great things that they're doing rather than just constantly going, oh my God, I got to temper down all the bad things. Starters for teams. When supporting students with complex learning, teams can reframe behaviors and adaptive. I think I've said that a lot. Build predictability. So this is just really just a repeat. Using tier 1 supports. Really teaching mindfulness, and not mindfulness in meditation sense, but mindfulness about being contextually sensitive. What does this environment ask of me right now? If we can slow down and we can start to look around, use our senses, and that's where interoception is too, because that's really one of our senses, we can start to understand and recruit the behaviors that we need for that environment. If an environment is unpredictable and chaotic, and a student learns to, oh, this environment, I'm going to need to kind of have my walls up. I'm going to need to be ready to flee because this is not predictable. That's okay. Sometimes we need those environments. And this also, we want to support the well-being of all. We want the child to be successful, but we have to remember we're a community. And so well-being is not about just the child, but it's well-being for all. And what is the relationship that we're having? Sometimes I've told paraprofessionals a lot and teachers, feel free to tap out if you need a break with other professionals. I know when I'm in a school building, if somebody needs a break, I will jump in for you to get what you need, because it's about well-being for all. If you're not good, the child is not going to be successful learning from you unless you can practice all of these things and not be in a good space, which is tricky. Again, layering in all of that individualized reinforcement for executive functioning and regulation, and then monitor and adjust weekly as a team. Work with your team, figure out how we're going to monitor it, how are we going to communicate the celebrations, and how might we communicate some of the real struggles so that we can layer in, not about layering in punishment, but how do we find those struggles so we can layer in teaching and education and figure out, is it a skill deficit? Is it a performance deficit? What other maybe supports does the student need to be successful in this environment? Punishments where you're just removed from the group doesn't teach a child anything except that they don't belong. And doing that over and over and over again, from my experience, has really taught kids to disengage with education. And so it's really tricky. So just being mindful of those strategies. And my final thought, our aim is not just to reduce challenging behaviors, but to foster belonging, predictability, success. And when adults adopt a relational educative approach, students are more likely to experiment with new behaviors because it's safe and discover, oh, it's safe and they can fail, and that's okay because it's part of learning and they can thrive in school. Thank you. I hope that this was helpful.